It is my privilege to be bringing you the message this week. These times cause us to ask a lot of questions. I have been assigned Luke chapter 12, and I'm going to be using a word that appears in verse 1 and 13. It is the word guard. I'm going to use an acronym for that word guard. And it starts with God. God ought always to be our reference point, our baseline. God ought always to be our foundation. And so in the midst of the times that we are in, we ask the question, is this of God? And we certainly can say, God is allowing this to happen. God has allowed the pandemic. Instead of taping this message today, Bonnie and I were scheduled to be on an airplane flying to London. It's not happening. So we ask the question, where is God in this? As we look around, it is very easy for us to see both good and evil in the midst of the pandemic. There is acts of helpfulness, compassion, and encouragement, but there are also acts of greed and selfishness. And so it is with that we move on to the second letter, which is understanding. We look for places where God is breaking in and showing himself in the midst of the pandemic. For example, Bonnie and I are frequent walkers in Heritage Park, and others are walking there as well. And we've been having new people brought into our life simply because of the times. While much of the world is in a state of despair, where are we at mentally? As a people of God, where should we be at mentally? Because our mental position is an accurate reflection of our spiritual state. So there's a lot of things in the midst of the pandemic that we don't understand. But one thing we do need to ask, and that is, what are we thinking in these times? The letter A is for attitude, and I'm going to include an attitude of watchfulness, because watch is another word that is prominent in Luke chapter 12. It says that we are to be on guard against the yeast of the Pharisees. What is feeding us, for better, for worse? The purpose of yeast is to leaven, to cause to rise up. And if you ask me when I'm not on the tape, I'll give you some other thoughts regarding yeast that I didn't know until I prepared the message for today. But we need to be cautious of the things which stir us to rise up in ways not consistent with our Christian faith. The Pharisees, for example, often exhibited a behavior that contradicted what they claimed to believe and feel as a people of God. Be on guard regarding the things outside of oneself. Those things that are feeding us, causing us to think sometimes rightly, other times tempting us to think on things that are not appropriate for us to think about as the people of God. The other reference to guard is to be on guard against all kinds of greed. In this case, it is to be on guard regarding the things inside me. These are not outside forces, but these are the things that come out of me. The R for guard stands for relationships. Challenging times encourage us to consider our relationships. Because we are taping this message, we are still going in a period of self-isolation and social distancing. What has that been like? How has the pandemic changed how we see God, others, and even ourselves? It certainly has changed how often we can see others. But how has it changed our relationship with God? Are we frustrated with God? Or is it a season where we are trying to draw closer to God? One of the things that I have done during the pandemic is to rewrite the 119th Psalm so that it reflects a prayer for the nations. It was quite an exercise, and I've edited it about 20 times, and every time I read it, I still wonder, did I do it right? But it's been a time to focus on God. And personally, in terms of relationships, I keep reminding myself, God is still on the throne. The D is to be deliberate. To be on guard duty is an active and responsible duty. Guard duty involves the ability to discern what is right and what is amiss, and to make quick decisions. In the acronym I am using, the word guard starts, continues, and ends by looking to God. To look to God is to trust God in a deliberate act. Luke 12:31, but seek his kingdom and these things will be given you as well. Trusting God is a good remedy for worry. Obedience to God is a good recipe for guarding oneself. What does being on guard with God for country, community, and even ourselves look like for us in the midst of this pandemic?